Well, hello. I'm recording this lesson earlier in the week than I normally do. I usually record it on Fridays, sometimes on Saturday, but today I'm recording on Thursday. And that's due to the holiday we have on Friday, the E-Day. So there may be some changes to some of these people I'm going to mention here. But this is the latest information I have. Keep Rachel in prayers as she continues recovering from her leg problems. Keep Linda in prayers Linda Williams, as she continues to recover from her hip replacement. I don't yet have an update on Steve Gehrig at Clarkston. He should have had heart surgery on Tuesday, and providing all has gone well, he will be transferred to his daughter's home in Bears Den probably this weekend, where he will have 2 weeks of recovery. Hoping to get some information on him later. From what the First Minister has said today on Thursday, and from what Dominic Robb said at the briefing from Downing Street, looks like lockdown's going to continue for a few more weeks, particularly in Scotland, but it looks like throughout the country. On Sunday, the Prime Minister will give us a roadmap as to how this will be led up in the future, but not quite yet, although there may be a little bit of let up in some areas very soon. So we need to continue being content where we are. Continue doing what we're doing. Washing our hands frequently. We should be doing that anyway, shouldn't we? And also social distancing, which we should be doing right now, and as well as staying away, not mixing households. I hope that everybody is getting outside and doing some exercise. They are encouraging us to do that, and I think that's been a good thing, especially with the beauty the beautiful weather we've had in the last few weeks. I thought I'd show you a few pictures I've taken over the last couple of weeks on my walks. This is the Sainsbury Depot, which is reasonably near our house. I've passed it for the last 2 weeks on my walk. And it's always good to see the lorries lining up to go in. Now, I don't know if they're going in to get food or going in to deliver food. But nevertheless, they're going in, which means the food is getting to our grocery stores, at least our Sainsbury's shops, and that's always a good thing. My Apple Watch gives me challenges each month, which I usually succeed in achieving. A challenge for May is to walk 114 miles, and that includes both normal walking around the house and what I do while exercising. But this meant an average of just over 3.6 miles per day. That's normally more than I accomplish in a day. So I've been taking some longer walks along the River Calder out past Langlands Moss. And this is one of the views I saw very early on in my walks down towards Calder Glen. I haven't made it down that far yet, but absolutely beautiful. I understand they filmed some of the Outlander series in this area here, probably closer to Calder Glen, but it's absolutely very scenic out there. I've been walking along the River Calder. Here's some of the views I've been getting, but I've discovered it's really neat that there's some absolutely beautiful scenery, and it's just over a mile from my house. It's very much like being out in the countryside because you can't see any houses or anything, although you could be back at the houses in just a few minutes. But it's absolutely beautiful. The one area they're saying that we may get a little bit of ease on lockdown on Sunday may be time spent outside. Well, of course, continuing the lockdown, continuing social distancing. And that might allow me to take a walk all the way to Calder Glen Country Park. That's right now is just beyond the range I can do in an hour. I've been walking almost an hour every day this week, and that gives me about 3.22 miles, I think, each day. One thing I have enjoyed while out walking is seeing the trees that are bloomed. They're in bloom right now, and it's lovely seeing that. Also flowers that are in bloom underneath the trees. And so I've really quite enjoyed seeing all of that. The beauties of springtime are great. In our lesson today, I want to look at an incident from Luke chapter 9, that of feeding the 5,000. Let's begin by looking at when we are. We've been through Luke chapters 3 and 4. I'm suggesting that took place in AD 27. I think that's pretty accurate, starting from his baptism and going to where he was rejected in his hometown of Nazareth. Of course, most of that's not recorded in Luke. It's recorded in John's gospel. He records some of this. And especially the teaching that went on in Judea during that time period. Luke chapters 5 through 8. We had what took place in AD 28, largely in Capernaum and the Galilee areas. We've seen that. We're going to be in Luke chapter 9 now. And I'm going to suggest that starts in AD 29. The early part of Luke chapter 9, Luke records that the apostles were sent out. I think that probably happened early on in that year. There's a reason why I think that, by the way. But so I'm suggesting that's probably in January. I'll tell you what that reason is in just a minute. They would have returned a little bit later. So giving them some time to travel around, I'm suggesting they returned probably in February of that year. I'm suggesting that the feeding of the 5,000 took place in March. And the reason I'm suggesting that is John's account of Jesus' life. And he gives us, I think, a better way of dating this particular incident, because he tells us that the Jewish Passover was near. And that would definitely date this in the spring of the year. And the year would be now 29 as we're moving on in time. And Passover being in April. So I'm placing this in March, because it obviously took time to travel there, because they do that on foot. And so it would have, they've not yet left. They don't seem to be in a hurry to leave. So I'm suggesting that this is taking place in March. Luke tells us that they were going to a place called Bethsaida, and I'll identify you where I think that was. So I'm placing that around the March area. So let's begin with verse 10 of Luke chapter 9. When the apostles returned, that is, from being out teaching, they reported to Jesus what they had done. Then he took them with him, and they withdrew by themselves to a town called Bethsaida. But the crowds learned about it and followed him. He welcomed them and spoke to them about the kingdom of God and healed those who needed healing. So Jesus had sent the 12 out into the area to begin bringing in a spiritual harvest. It's Matthew who recorded Jesus saying the harvest is abundant, but the workers are few, as he sent them out. And I'm sure we are familiar with that particular verse. So they did that. They began traveling from village to village, proclaiming the good news and healing people everywhere. And Jesus told them to proclaim the kingdom of God, heal those who were ill. When they returned, though, Jesus took them away. I mean, they've been spending probably up to a month or 6 weeks going from village to village, teaching people. And they probably needed a retreat to rest and to recharge their batteries, so to speak. Now, Mark recorded in his account of Jesus' life that because so many people were coming and going around Jesus, that they didn't even have a chance to eat. So he told them, come with me by yourselves to a quiet place and get some rest. So they go to Bethsaida. Luke records it as a town or a village called Bethsaida. I'm suggesting they're not going really into the town, but into that area. And very quickly, the crowds figured out where they were and joined them. So interesting how Luke recorded there in Luke chapter 9 that even though they're tired, even though they need a break, actually it's Mark who recorded that, but Luke records that Jesus still welcomed the crowds when they found them. And they welcomed them, taught them, healed those who needed healed. Let's have a quick look about where I think this is taking place. The town of Bethsaida, you can see on our map there. It's a bit north of the Sea of Galilee. And this particular village, the excavations they've done, it has a well-preserved synagogue. We were supposed to have visited there in November, but we were unable to do that. I think we had some people in our group that were a bit slow getting through some of the sites, and as a result put us behind schedule, and we didn't get to go there. So it's a place I still would like to see. But if you want to go to where Jesus fed the 5,000, because that's what's about to happen in our text, they'll take you to not to this area. They'll take you to a different area. They'll say this is where it took place. And they take you to a place that the scholars call Bethsaida, Galilee. I don't think this is where it happened. Okay, it doesn't fit the description in the Gospels. John records that they went to the other side of the Sea of Galilee. And heading just down from Capernaum, I don't think really works as being the other side of the Sea of Galilee. Although the place I think it happened would qualify for that. Most of the commentators I've read have suggested they went to a place called Bethsaida Julius. And so an area there below the town of Bethsaida. It is on the other side, as you can see, from the other side of the northern part of Galilee. And I think this fits the description of the Gospels better. It's in a plain that's called the plain of Bethsaida. And here's a photograph of that particular plain, that particular area from looking at it from the west, so the north part of the Sea of Galilee. This is not my photograph, by the way. It's credited at the end. But this is probably the area where this takes place. It does fit the descriptions. Just down the village of Bethsaida would be up to the left of this particular photograph. The place they'll take you, and since I've been there, I'll show you some photographs of it and basically tell you I don't think that's where it happened. But the place they take you is the Church of the Heptapagan. Hepta meaning seven, of course, pagan meaning springs, the Church of the Seven Springs. It's also known as the Church of the Multiplication. And Christians, as you can see in the sign here, venerated a large rock, which they said very early on that Jesus is said to have laid the bread and the fish before he fed the 5,000. I don't think they venerated this from the year 28. I think it's happened in 29, early part of 29, but let's not dispute over a few months. But I have a feeling this took place later on, that they began venerating this rock. But this was where, at around 350, that they built a church building. And they used the rock as the center of that first church site, and they built an altar on it. And this church was built by, notice the sign tells us, by a Jewish nobleman from Tiberias. And so that's where it's where they suggest. I think the problem is, the reason they suggested this site is because there were a number of Bethsaidas. And this seems to me to clearly be the wrong one. It doesn't seem to fit the descriptions. Having said that, it is a beautiful church that they have there. It's been expanded many times over the years, as you can see in the plan that they have in the photograph there. It's very near a major road, which to me does not really qualify as a remote place. As we're going to see, it is a remote place later on. So I don't think this is the right location. It just doesn't fit anything at all. When you go into the site, they've got a building that's there, olive tree there in the middle, lots of old things to see, and of course a gift shop. I mean, what else would they have? When you go into the building itself, the basilica, this is the current church building. This is a reconstruction, by the way, from the early part of the 1980s, I think 1980 to 82. That this was built, and it's built on the plan of the Byzantine basilica, which had been built around 480, but had been destroyed in 614. Underneath that arch there, underneath the chandelier there, they have the altar, and under the altar is a stone. By the way, in that previous picture, you'd have seen a Christmas tree, and you see here a nativity scene. Yeah, we were there in January of 2018. So that was just before Orthodox Christmas. So they had nativity scenes everywhere. You can see the one underneath the altar there is complete with Christmas tree lights, I guess supposed to represent the stars, although they're there wouldn't be stars there in the manger scene, and you see the star that's shooting there as well and all that. So you have a sort of manger scene there as well. But what's the part they're venerating there is the bit underneath what this manger scene is sitting on. They say that is the rock, the stone where Jesus, either he sat or he stood or he placed the loaves and fish as he multiplied them. I've read all of those things supposed to have taken place there, although I don't think this is the right site. But when they excavated the site in 1932, they did discover that the mosaic floors were largely still intact. And there's you can see how beautiful they are. The bit, by the way, just before the altar we saw previously, they had loaves and fish there on it, which they placed there. By the way, the little glass bit there that you can see in this photograph here, and there's several of these, they're glass panels that show you the foundation of the original church, which dates from around 350. The mosaic would have dated from about 480. So anyway, that's the site that I don't think it is, but I thought I'd show you the photographs anyway. Moving on to verse 12. Late in the afternoon, the 12 came to him and said, "Send the crowd away so they can go to the surrounding villages and countryside and find food and lodging, because we are in a remote place here." He replied, "You give them something to eat." They answered, "We have only 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish, unless we go and buy food for all this crowd." About 5,000 men were there. But he said to his disciples, "Make them sit down in groups of about 50 each." So it is late in the afternoon, and they've been there for a while. And Luke tells us that this is a remote place. By the way, that also points to the location not being Bethsaida, Galilee, because that's not very remote. Bethsaida, Galilee is right next to the main highway, main Roman road, as you saw there in those photographs. And it's only 3 kilometers, less than 2 miles, to Capernaum. You can walk to Capernaum in just over half hour. So that's not very remote, especially when you're in a society that walks everywhere. So the people need food. They need time to be able to get there and get it. It's late afternoon. There would probably still be a few hours of daylight left. So the disciples suggest they send the people away so they have time to find food and lodging. I don't think they were expecting Jesus' reply. He said to them, "You give them something to eat. Don't you love it?" So I don't think they're expecting that. They search around. They're able to come up with 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. And by the way, the loaves here, they would have been flat loaves. I think those are probably a bit big because it seems to be a boy's lunch. And so that's probably a bit too much to eat there. But anyway, I think they're a bit smaller, but nevertheless, there you go. And I think the fish are probably a bit too big as well, because John tells us that they were little fish. So I don't think they were quite that big. But John also tells us they were barley loaves. So they definitely would have been flat. If you've ever tried to bake with barley flour, I do upon occasion. And barley flour doesn't rise very much. There's not a whole lot of gluten in it. So that's all that they had. 5 loaves of bread, 2 little fish. And that just wasn't enough to feed 5,000 men, it says, that were there, without buying more. Obviously, it's not. Wouldn't it be a party enough to feed one person, would it? Although that's probably a bit more than was actually there. So, by the way, 5,000 men, could have been women and children there as well, but does specifically mention 5,000 men there, which is interesting. But maybe there were 5,000 in total, because it's interesting, Jesus had the people sit in groups of 50. By the way, if it's just men, it was just 5,000, that would be 100 groups. So maybe it was just 5,000. I don't know. But very well could have been women and children there as well. So have him sit down. He's about to do something. So continuing on in the text, The disciples did so. I forgot to set this to come out, but that'll be okay. And everyone sat down, taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and looking up to heaven, he gave thanks and broke them. Then he gave them to the disciples to distribute to the people. They all ate and were satisfied, and the disciples picked up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces that were left over. So he takes the bread and the fish, he gives thanks and broke them, and it just continued to multiply. And the disciples gave the food out to the people. Interesting, everybody ate and they were satisfied. I don't know if he just broke them and the baskets continued filling up, or if he just continued breaking it into baskets and they would take them out as he broke them and to take them out. But 12 baskets of food left over. By the way, we recently watched the miniseries Jesus the Messiah, if you remember, starring Robert Powell from the 1970s. They depicted some things very well in that miniseries. It was interesting. It's been years since I'd seen it. But the feeding of the 5,000 was not one of the things they depicted very well. They had Jesus multiplying fairly large, raw fish. And they were raw. And then as they distributed them, you could tell it's raw fish. And the people ate the bread, and definitely didn't eat the fish. And I presume they took the fish home. And this seems to be, he is multiplying cooked fish and baked bread. So at least these photos are a bit better, although the bread looks a bit huge for being a boy's lunch, and the fish are probably a bit too big as well. But it is depicting well that there's plenty of food. 12 basketfuls left over. Can you imagine that? Starting with 5 barley loaves, which have been fairly small, and 2 little fish, and ending up with 12 baskets of food left over. David Roper commented on this. He said, a snack for one boy became an all-you-can-eat buffet for thousands of hungry people. I liked that. So, yes, thousands were able to eat. Let's make a few observations about what happened here. It's interesting. This is the only miraculous sign that's found in all 4 accounts of Jesus' life, other than the resurrection, of course. But it's quite an incredible sign, isn't it? By the way, those 4 accounts, Matthew records it in chapter 14 of his account of Jesus' life. Mark has it in chapter 6 as we have it. Luke has it in chapter 9. And John has it, of course, in chapter 6. It's an incredible sign. 5 loaves, 2 little fish becoming a meal for over 5,000 people. Have you ever wondered, why is this the one that's recorded by them all? And the only one, other than the resurrection, that's recorded by every one of them. I'll give you a suggestion. Do you think it's possibly to establish that it really happened? Yeah, it could be. Scholars have tried to explain this away. Perhaps William Barclay's attempt is one of the more feeble ones. That everybody got out their lunch being shamed of the boy who brought out the 5 loaves and 2 fish, and that's how they all had food to eat. And it's not really what happened. I think the fact that all mention it should tell us something. And if it didn't really happen, there would have been those still living when the accounts of Jesus' life were being circulated that would have been happy to step up and say, hey, that's not how it happened. But of course, we don't have any record of that ever happening. Donald Guthrie, in his book, Jesus the Messiah, said, the fact that all 4 writers record it, and 2 of them record a similar event later on, of course, the feeding of the 4,000, with differing amounts left over, he says it's difficult to explain if the incident has no basis in truth. And I think he's absolutely correct. This is a true incident. So, what can we learn from this particular incident? What does this tell us about Jesus? I would suggest it tells us several things. tells us he has the power to multiply something that's already existing. Taking bread, taking fish, and feeding a multitude of people, thousands of people. But think about that for a second. If he's the creator of all, doing this would have been no problem whatsoever, would it? It would have not caused a problem for him at all. After all, what this is pointing to, he is the creator and he is the Messiah. He is the Son of God. Early on, when we saw something that I think was also a good lesson we can learn, he took time for people. See, when the people came, even though the disciples are tired, they need rest, Jesus still welcomed the people. He taught them. He healed them. He ended up feeding them. I also find it interesting that Jesus was willing to challenge his disciples. John gives us a bit more detail than the other records do. He includes who did what. And Jesus, he records, asked Philip where they could get enough food for the crowd. John also tells us that Jesus already knew what he was going to do, but this was basically a test for the apostles. Philip's response: "It'll take more than 200 denarii. That's 200 days' wages to feed them." They obviously didn't have that kind of money. And it's Andrew who found the boy with his barley loaves and fish. And I think we can learn from Andrew that even a small amount may be worthwhile. But if he's willing to challenge his disciples, why do we think we might not ever be challenged in our lives as Christians? Of course we're going to be challenged, because challenges are there for us to help us grow our faith. And undoubtedly, this particular incident helped the apostles to grow in their faith in Jesus, as we're going to see in the incident in our next lesson, which takes place just after this. One more lesson, though, before we finish, and that is simply this. When Jesus took the food, before giving it out, before even multiplying it, he gave thanks to God for it. That's a lesson for us, isn't it? If Jesus, the creator of all, give thanks to the Father for the food that had been provided and which he's about to multiply, I would suggest we need to do the same. That's a good lesson for us as well. We're still in lockdown. So during the next week, of course, lockdown is going to continue for the next few weeks. By the way, this is the 7th Sunday we haven't been able to meet, the 8th Sunday, for those who needed to be shielded at home when we were only socially distancing. But during the week, let's continue spending time every day with God. We should be doing that anyway, but this is a good time to maybe establish some good habits. Spend time every day with God. I would suggest rereading Luke chapter 9 if you haven't done that yet, because we're going to be in Luke chapter 9 again next week in our next lesson as well. And continue, of course, praying. And there's so much to pray for. Pray for those we know who are ill. Pray for those who have contracted this virus. And most of all, pray that this virus will soon be over, that we can get back to at least some degree of normality to our lives. I'm just looking forward to the time that we can meet together again. But spend some time in God's Word every day. I would remind you that the British Bible School continues to provide online Bible classes as well as a Sunday message. And I would recommend you tuning into those. 11 o'clock on Sunday morning for the live Sunday message. Of course, it's archived. You can watch it later if you wish. One thing I've been doing is also joining other congregations for their worship. Recently, we joined Aberdeen for their Zoom period of worship. I've been asked to speak for them soon for one of their periods. We're hoping to join Livingston soon as well, and to be able to share in their Zoom time of worship. But the Zoom classes through the week that British Bible School has are well worth tuning in for. They last for under an hour or under, and the schedule can be found on the BBS website, as well as the links to be able to find those particular classes. The classes are also archived on the BBS YouTube channel if you want to watch them later. They're very much like this presentation. They're recorded with somebody talking over the presentation. We have classes, by the way, on James, on Job, on Ecclesiastes, on Galatians, and on Ephesians. In the meantime, I wish you all a good week. Tune in, hopefully, to hear the Prime Minister on Sunday evening at 7 o'clock to find out how we're going to be getting out of this lockdown, the map that he's going to reveal for us. But let's hope we can be back together very soon. Continue to pray for each other. Continue to stay in touch with each other.